Hello there, it's Cindy Ingram, and I'm here for another Word of the Year update. And I have been doing these as videos and then putting them on the podcast. And I decided to do this one just as a podcast because I was finding myself stifled by the, the video. I had to make sure my hair looks fine, and I have to make sure that if the dog barks, if the dog barks, it disrupts it. There's all these things. And so I'm all about not putting unreasonable expectations on myself, and I think that just recording the podcast is fine. So that's what we're going to do today. So I have a couple things. One, the first thing is the podcast is going to shift a little bit slightly. I am finding that keeping up with weekly interviews for the episodes is really hard for me energetically because it does take a good amount of time finding the images and, doing the show notes and all of that sort of thing. That I am now, and then scheduling them, and there's all this stuff that goes into it. So I'm going to start switching those to every other week because it's either that or I burn out. There's all this stuff happening all together. So I don't want them to stop happening altogether because I love them. So we're going to do every other week. And then in the interim weeks, I will do my Word of the Year updates. So that feels really good to me as an option. And then the second thing is I haven't really talked about this on the podcast very much at all. And I don't even know if I've even told you before, unless you follow me on Facebook or Instagram. But I am a coach. So if you have found, this podcast has brought up things in you about yourself that you want to work on. And if you find that you're curious about what it would look like to work with a coach, I would love to have a call with you and to talk about it. I do free discovery calls. And so it's just a Zoom meeting with me where we talk about you basically. And it's not a coaching call, but it is an opportunity to see what coaching is all about. And because those discovery calls are very much focused on you, you do end up with some clarity about your issue during that time. So if that's something you're curious about, I would love to meet with you. Just go over to artandself.com/discovery and you can book a call. I think at the moment there's actually not even a link on the website. So if you go to artandself.com, you probably won't even find it. But artandself.com/discovery, I need to add that to the website. Maybe saying this will prompt me to do it. That website's been sort of a slow development. Coaching has absolutely changed my life. It has brought me so much clarity. And what I love about coaching is that it is very action focused. So I think everybody should have a therapist and everybody should have a coach. And coaching and therapy are very different. And I'm actually in both right now. And so it's really fun to really witness what the differences are. Coaching is very much about moving you forward. And if there is something you're working towards, a way you want to feel, a way you want to be, a change you want to make, working on things that are really keeping you from moving forward, coaching is really great for that. So would love to talk to you. Okay, so those are my two little things. And then let me talk about my Word of the Year update. So, oh my gosh, I can't even keep up. I was going to do these weekly, but me at this point, I'm not very good at consistency and that sort of thing. And one of the things is I had to process it, and it took over my whole system before I could actually be able to talk about it. So I'm going to tell you a story of what happened last week. And it's still kind of raw, and it still feels really vulnerable to share. But I'm going to go ahead and share it because it is... if I want to be authentic and real in these updates, I want to share what's actually coming up as things do with this journey I'm on this year. So as you know, I'm writing this book. I've been writing it for a long time, but really very dedicated to writing it since April of last year. And It started out as an art education book, and then it was kind of half art education book, half memoir type. But the memoir piece was still kind of academic sounding. And then eventually I started working with my book coach, and we realized I was writing two different books. It was two different things. And so we cut the art education book part and focused on it becoming a memoir. And so I've been writing it. I've written more than half at this point. It's going slower than I wanted, but it's such a beautiful process. And each chapter is an artwork, and I sort of interpret the artwork and tell my story at the same time. And then the artwork kind of adds layers of meaning to my story, and like use it as a metaphor and as a tool to sort of drive the narrative forward. But I recently got to a part of the book that I realized, so my first part one, is about my childhood. It's about, and my 20s. It's about social anxiety. It's about shame. It's about sort of body issues, not weight stuff, but more just general. And it's about how I kind of overcame those things. How I learned to love myself. Well, I learned to start the process of loving myself. I learned to start the process of believing that I had value and believing that others wanted to be around me. That kind of stuff. All things you can work on in coaching, by the way. That's something you're interested in. This episode is not too soul coaching. It's just that's what's in my head and my heart to share. So that was part one, and it had a narrative. It had very clear. I've told the story a lot of times. It has things. It was and it was all a lot of it was about changing my external environment too. And the end of the part is that me starting my business and taking a look at my life and realizing that I wasn't living the life I wanted. So I made these big moves to become who I wanted to be. And that was starting my business. It was doing, there was a lot of decisions there. And so externally, I changed my life. And so it was easy to tell that story. But in part two, if you look at the beginning of part 2 and the end of part 2, nothing has changed in my life. I have the same family. I have the same friends. I have the same children. Everything is the same. There's no big dramatic thing that happens. But what happens is a change in me. What happens is all internal. And I was talking to two people about this. Madeline, my best friend, who you've heard on the podcast before. I was talking about the difference between my sister and I. And my sister is she's very well-spoken, and she's very opinionated. And she's very, she can take an issue, like a political issue, and talk the hell out of that issue. She can say all the things about that issue and all how it affects society and how it affects people personally. And she can just name facts and figures and statistics. She just knows that stuff and can speak it. And I was like, I've always been really intimidated by people who can do that, because for me, it's I know those things in my body. I can feel them. I know them to be true. I know, I feel them. But I can't always bring that out into words or whatever. And then Madeline beautifully was like, when has facts and figures ever caused anybody to change their mind about anything? She was like, it's the heart and it's the humanity. And I was like, oh, right, art. I was like, that's why art exists, Madeline. So it was just a funny moment. And it was, it was one of those things that I have been dismantling over the last many years. And it's something I've been writing about in the book. And I don't know if I've talked about it on here or not. I can't remember. But about dismantling this identity of being the smart one, and how that hindered my creativity, because somewhere along the way I associated creativity and intelligence are two different things, and I can't, intelligence was the higher of the two. I know that's not true. Logically, I know it's not true, and I know I'm very creative, but that happened, and subconsciously, and through messaging and society and education and all the things. So I've had to dismantle that, what it means to be smart and what it means to be intelligent. And I've had to confront that at every step of the way for all of the part 2 of the book, which is really the last like 5 years or so. Like my spirituality, my creativity, my art making, my writing, like all of those things, I've had to confront this like smart identity that does not want me to do those things, that those aren't smart enough. So fascinating. So anyway, I had that conversation with Madeline, and I started to think, okay, well, like I do have these feelings, and I do want to communicate them, and that is like, one of the things that my sister comments on too is like how much I post on social media. And like I share like really vulnerable things on social media, and I think it confuses her, and she'll say stuff about it, and I was like, well, that's, and I always felt like I was doing something wrong by doing that. But ultimately, like through this whole conversation about this, I was like, oh, I'm an artist. I have this natural need to convey to communicate my humanity, and for myself to be seen, and also for others to be seen in my humanity. That for those that can't share their humanity in that way, they can receive it and learn from it. And that's what I've been doing most of my life, is like receiving other artists' humanity, but ignoring my own like really inherent desire to communicate those feelings and to others, So that's something I've really been working on, is like, oh, okay, there's something deeper here. That I am an artist, that there is this thing in me that has to come out. And I was even talking about my book yesterday with a friend over Voxer, and I was like, I feel like I have to do it. Like, it's not a book I'm writing for strategy, for business, to make money, to sell anything, to like the reason I'm doing it is I feel like it is in me and I have to do it. Like it has to come out. And I that's to me what an artist is. I'm sorry for the dinging. It's the only notifications I have on my phone are my children and my daughter's texting me from school. Okay, so that was a really profound conversation. And then, so I had that, I was kind of thinking about that feeling in me that like I don't feel like I can, when making art in my art journal, I don't feel like I can take that feeling and put it on the page just yet. I feel like it does happen, but it's more of a process of intuition and playing with the materials, and then sort of things come up. It's more of an intuitive process, but it's really in my writing where that feeling can be accessed and expressed. And so I was talking to my book coach about part 2 of the book, and I said, I am having a hard time writing or even thinking about what to write for part 2, besides using the art as the interpretation and that stuff, because I don't feel like there's anything solid to hold on to, because it is so internal. The only thing solid I have to hold on to is the artwork that I've chosen for the chapters. And then she goes, what are your thoughts about poetry? I think that's all she said. And like my entire body revolted, like not in a bad way. It felt really uncomfortable, but it was this really intense feeling of, one, being seen by my book coach, Heather. 2, the chapter I had been writing, at least 3 times while I was writing that chapter, I had the urge to write a poem out of nowhere. So that was fresh. When I was a child, I wrote poetry as much as I made art. it was just this thing I did and felt like I had to do. And it was really soothing for me, especially in a lot of my sadness that I had about my my dad, who had like left, abandoned us, kind of disappeared. I had a lot of sadness about that. And one of the only ways I could really process those emotions was through writing poetry. And so I wrote poem after poem, but I haven't in so long. But it was like when she said that, it was like suddenly that little girl writing poems was there, and she was like, I'm here. She's like, oh, I'm here. See me, see me, see me. It was like that. And I'm tearing up now because it felt so profound that it was like unlocked something in me that I had pushed down way deep, that I had almost, like I logically knew, yes, I wrote poems, but like that desire to write them and what it did for me, I had completely forgotten that. And her just saying, what do you think about poems? Like just unleashed this like a torrent of feeling. And the rest of the day I was just destroyed. I couldn't do anything. And then I just almost broke down into tears multiple times. And then the next day I showed up to writing practice and I was like, you know what, I'm going to try to write a poem. Heather's idea was to do a whole chapter with just poems. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I can do that, but I was like, I can try to write a poem. And so I did. I sat down at writing practice. It was a Thursday. Writing practice is at 8:30 on Thursdays. And I wrote a poem. And then writing practice ended at 9:30, and then I kept writing it. And I kept writing it until like lunchtime. It was like 1:00, I think, I finished writing that poem. Because one, it was so fun. It felt so good. It felt so familiar. It felt like, oh, I don't have to figure out how to write around the feelings to convey them. I can just write the feelings. I can just dive into the metaphor. And then I wrote the poem is about the artwork that I was writing in the chapter. So I got to like really like feel the emotions in the chapter and put that into words. And I told a story in it, but I didn't have to worry about grammar. I didn't have to worry about any of that. And it was so wonderful. So it was like something deep was unlocked in me last week. And something raw and something really tender. And so the book's going to have poems. Oh, and I wrote one and I love it so much. I can't wait to start sharing these poems. But yeah, so that happened. That's my story. And I want to encourage you to think about what did you forget about yourself, and what do you need to remember? The last line of the poem that I wrote is just remember with a period. And are there parts of you that you buried deep? Are there parts of you that you've forgotten about? That little kid who maybe loved to play in nature, or that loved to draw or paint or sing or dance or write poems. Like, what have you forgotten about yourself, and what are some ways to bring that back? So thank you for listening to my story. I can't believe I'm already sharing it. I thought I was gonna hold this one to my chest for a long time, but I feel like I'm processed enough to share it. And thank you so much for listening. And if you need help getting in touch with that little you from the past, and figuring out what you've forgotten and figuring out what you've been missing, because honestly, I felt like once it came back, once you said that, it was like I didn't even know I was missing it until she said that. And that's why that wave of emotion was so strong. I always was really kind of embarrassed by it too, because it was like really intense. So that's something that we can talk about in coaching too. So if you're interested in finding that spark and finding what you might have lost, or what's buried deep below all the layers you've built over yourself, I would love to help you with that. So you can book a call again at artandself.com/discovery. Thank you so much for listening to my update. I tried to get it in 20 minutes because writing practice is starting right now, and I did it. So, all right. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your week. We'll have another interview next week with Lynn Carpenter about her horse coaching, which is amazing. And then I'll be back in 2 weeks for another artist update. Goodbye.